Hello, this is Brian with the Bad Manners Podcast. I'm reacting to a video by David Stewart titled The Real Reason Public Schools Keep Getting Worse. This is somebody I've never seen a video from before, so I have no idea what I'm in for getting into it, so let's go.
Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. Why do public schools actually suck? What actually makes them bad? What makes their test scores low? It's not the reasons that you're mostly going to see on social media. Now, keep in mind, just some background, I'm a former public school teacher. I'm a credentialed teacher. I homeschool my kids. The reasons that I homeschool my kids are not really the reasons that public schools suck and why we've seen a decline in their test scores and their performance. The reality is public schools are performing worse because demographics have changed. We are not comparing the same kids.
Right out the gate, he is taking a stance that some will immediately find objectionable. Before I delve into that, first comment I want to make is the fact that he homeschools his children immediately, they're likely going to outperform public students by a mile. Anytime you have a learning environment in which you have smaller groups or ideally individual work, the outcomes are just going to be superior. I strongly recommend to every parent that can do it, homeschooling your children is the way to go. And this is coming from somebody that's also a public education teacher. Aside from that, touching on the demographics thing, this is one of the reasons that in my teacher preparation program that there's this idea of culturally responsive teaching. And this is supposed to be a way to address the different cultures you're going to have in your classroom as a result of this multicultural society we have now. But it's not an effective means of solving the general achievement gaps that exist between some of these populations and Americans that have been here for multiple generations. But before I go any more into that, let's see what he has to say.
So it's a change of demographics. You can't say this politely in a lot of places. Just some background for this too. I've been seeing a lot of social media posts. I watched a YouTube video from a big channel the other day trying to figure out why schools have gotten worse, and they just kind of circle the issue without saying it because it's impolite to say you have a lot of immigrant children and children of immigrants who are bringing down test scores and changing the academic environment, so it's worse now than it used to be.
One of the interesting things on the subject of immigrant children he mentioned is my best friend is Mexican, and he came here decades ago. I'm 40, he's 38. And one of the things that you often see from the immigrant community that arrived here decades ago is you will find a very common refrain that the character of those arriving here simply are not the same as those that arrived in previous decades. And what that means is they're not bringing with them this intention of assimilating and making sure they pick up the English language, doing their best to succeed in the American system, working extraordinarily hard. And some of his criticism, I've seen it to a degree in my own practice where I kid you not, there was a student that I had that just flat out asked, why do I need to learn English? I don't need to learn English because everybody around me speaks Spanish. So the character of the immigrant that has been coming here over the decades might just be appreciably different. And whether that's because our social safety net functions as a lure to that population, or similar moral decadence has been happening in different countries other than our own, that part I don't really know for sure on. But already I do appreciate that he's taking the time to address this subject because it is something that isn't really allowed to be spoken about too much.
The other stuff that I talk about on this channel that's maybe against public schools or for homeschooling or just ways that public school could be improved, that's a very, very small percentage of what actually is changing, because a lot of times what we're testing with like standardized tests, we're testing generalized intelligence plus a little bit of their academic background. And so as you have a lower concentration of that, classic white American demographic that we were maybe testing in 1970 and saying, here's where they are, and they've gotten lower now. Unless you're controlling for that, you're not really getting the full picture. What you're doing is you're comparing that population to just a different group of people. America is not the same people it was 40, 50 years ago.
He is correct on this. If you were to truly see exactly what's happening with American test scores over time, you would need to some extent, make sure you're judging those test scores by ethnic group. Because clearly the ethnic group of the United States circa 1970, 1980, the composition of the country was just significantly different. With the introduction of the Hart-Celler Act in 1965, the demographic makeup of the United States began shifting considerably, and it's only accelerated further over time. And if, for example, by the year 2050, perhaps maybe white Americans are no longer even the majority ethnic group, whoever that new majority ethnic group is, presumably Hispanic, how are you going to compare their performance to American performance circa 1970? They're not the same. And the only reason this has persisted to any significant degree, from what I can tell, is because leftists strongly believe in tabula rasa, the whole all humans are blank slates, they're all essentially interchangeable if you just put them in the same environment, but that doesn't exist in reality. Obviously these children, they've got parents, the parents have whatever particular culture they came from, and looking at the entire world, cultures have very different performative outcomes. And so the truth is, if you were to entirely get rid of any people descended of Europeans in the United States, and the new dominant ethnic group was somebody else, the performance of that ethnic group is probably going to more closely resemble the countries they originally came from in terms of performance. And that's not to say that, those people are bad or inferior or anything like that. It's simply going to be in line with what is more culturally familiar with them. Because the United States isn't magic dirt where we all acquire the same ability to achieve positive outcomes. We're going to mimic whatever our culture is, whether you're a recent arrival or you've been in the United States for hundreds of years.
And because you're not comparing the same people, you're not really comparing anything. You need to figure out, have the same students, are black students performing worse? Are white students performing worse with the same sort of population that they had 50 years ago? Not all students then and all students now. It's going to paint, you're just not painting an accurate picture of what's going on. I've seen so many pieces of content that come up with crazy ideas for why kids are doing worse. One of them is that kids are hungry. I'm sorry, kids are not hungry. We have the most generous welfare programs that I can think of that are attached directly to public school.
It's not just the welfare programs. There's all kinds of private programs. There's food banks. And at least in what I've seen, there are far more chubby to obese children than there ever were when I was younger. And that also includes chubby to obese among ethnic minorities. Food is not really the problem most of the time. There are a couple outliers, particularly among difficulties faced by Native American tribes, the more poor ones, but that's a unique circumstance.
Free lunch. There's schools that are Title I schools where everyone gets free lunch. They don't even means test this anymore. Everyone gets free lunch. No excuses. Everyone gets free lunch. Kids are still coming hungry. Okay, free breakfast now. Free breakfast, free lunch, free afternoon meal. So 3 full meals a day paid for by the state so that kids are not hungry. And yet you still have teachers that are, let's be honest, I think most of them are lying when they say, well, we caught a kid stealing food. It's like, if he was actually so hungry that he's stealing food, that's a child abuse issue. You need to be calling CPS. Child Protective Services needs to be doing an investigation because that kid's being intentionally starved by abusive parents, especially when you can get 3 free meals a day plus hundreds of dollars a month in food stamps. That's an abuse issue. If you are realistic about poverty here in the United States, you find that there's a very strong correlation between poverty and being on food stamps and being obese. That is to say, our poor people are so well fed, they are medically they're medically worse off because they've been so well fed. They're obese. There's not a shortage of calories in the United States of America. You're going to have a very hard time finding any kid that's starving that's not the result of like.
He's talking about food stamps. One of the things that stands out to me with that is anytime I go grocery shopping, I'm obviously not on the social safety net. My cart is always considerably less full than somebody in front of me in line that pulls out the food stamp card and their cart is full of absolute trash when it comes to health. And it's a very consistent pattern. If it wasn't consistent, it wouldn't even merit much attention. But because there is a strong correlation among those on the lower rungs of the economic ladder and food stamps and overweight or obese and horrible food choices, but also because of food stamps, they can just buy more or less as they please. It leads to negative health outcomes.
Actual child abuse, like parents intentionally keeping food away from a child. In which case, if they're showing up to your classroom and they're stealing your food, and it's not because they're just bad kids who steal food because they don't have any morals, then that's a CPS issue. So I get all kinds of these stories that are like this. Oh, it's education's worse now because of this thing, because teachers don't get support from administrators. That might be part of it, but all the things we're talking about, they're this little tiny percentage. There's a little tiny percentage, and the big one is just you're not comparing the same kids. It's the demographics that have changed. But those demographics alter a lot about the public school experience and do make it worse than it otherwise would be.
So I don't know if he's going to touch on it. Obviously, he's focusing on the demographic side. When I look at the demographic side, I'm chiefly concerned with the cultures. Because if these are not cultures that are actively attempting to assimilate to the overall American culture and instead they're retaining their own independent practices, uh, it considerably increases the chances that what behavioral, you know, what commonly accepted behaviors and what expectations are put upon that child might be appropriate to the cultures from the places they came from, but might be less so if you're in the American system and trying to achieve certain outcomes. So I look at it more as the cultural side of things, but within the framework of cultures, the number one thing I complain about in any education related video is the parents. And the parents are the conduit for that culture. So if the parents are not instilling in their child proper socialization and appreciation for the importance of academics, following up with their students' academics, and really pushing them forward, then you're usually going to have more negative outcomes on average. And this can easily happen if you're from a culture that simply does not value education. And we can see this within the United States. We have cultures within the United States that are associated with an achievement gap. And that achievement gap has always been compared to white Americans. So anybody below the white American is considered to have this gap. And usually the leftists try to blame this on just racism. Oh, it's systemic racism. The whites engineered a system that's by them, for them, and of course only they can perform well on it. They'll ignore any of the ethnic groups that actually outperform whites, and there are actually a few. But really what you should do is you should look at this data of how each group is performing, and if there are groups that are performing lower, there should be a look at, okay, is this culture one that is really pushing the significance of education? There's going to be a correlation there in terms of not necessarily appreciating its significance.
So, whatever your population is, that's what you're going to gear your academics towards. I know this from being a public school teacher at a Title I school, you can't have the same standards that you have at a school that's full of rich kids. You just can't. You're going to be banging your head against the wall. You have to meet kids where they are. And that's where a lot of my kind of outsider opinions on things like homework have come from, is I adjust my expectations to reality. I try not to adjust reality to my expectations, because you're setting yourself up for failure. And that's why I think a lot of our opinions about public school and it being very helter skelter is we're trying to make reality fit our preconceived expectations. And
It's a good thing he does that in his professional practice, because the truth is, obviously he knows this, but for anybody watching it, all teaching is supposed to occur within a student's zone of proximal development. So you have to bring the teaching to the level they're at, so that what they're learning now can be properly scaffolded and their skill set will continue to grow. Uh, but unfortunately, when you've got significant portions of your class not having grade level skills in, for example, English, it interferes with what you would be able to teach if you had a classroom full of students that were properly on grade level. So instead of having more cognitively demanding, complex activities, you end up scaling it back some. So instead of more open response, you perhaps have more multiple choice, because that's something a little more accessible with them where their skill set is at. And of course, considering that we still have to teach the grade level standard, uh, and you might have a student with fourth grade skills, you still need a way to be able to assess whether they learned it. But if they can't express it as fully as they should be able to because they're not on the proper grade level, then the teacher's left with little recourse but to, make sure that the way they're assessing for learning is one that that student can actually accomplish. Because the only other real alternative would be to fail pretty much all students all the time. And there is a good argument that that should be what happens in a true meritocracy, but it's not something the public education system would tolerate at all, because it's more interested in socially engineering positive feelings for these students.
that's just not a great way to go about it. You have to meet kids where they are. But meeting kids where they are means you're lowering the standards, you're changing the academic environment so that those gifted kids have fewer opportunities to excel than they used to have. So, what do parents?
He's definitely not going to touch on it, but they preach this in teacher preparation programs. They push it at the schools you teach at. He taught Title I taught Title I. The whole response to intervention model, or RTI, that is so big because it's supposed to help address skills deficits for students that are simply behind. And the whole RTI model essentially obligates teachers to throw far more of their time at the low performing students than they ever would at the higher performing students. And make no mistake, if you're a leftist and you believe in equity, that's actually something you believe should happen, because you're trying to engineer equal outcomes for everyone, because you believe people are blank slate and given the right opportunities that everybody could accomplish the same things. Such understandings have nothing to do with reality whatsoever. And if you wanted a good, prospering, healthy civilization, you'd have a model in which those gifted students could be pushed as hard as possible. Because the truth is, all civilizations advance on the backs of a very small group of individuals, and those are your gifted individuals. They're the rising tide that lifts all ships. And I say this as somebody completely average myself. The average person is not going to do the groundbreaking contributions that fundamentally alter meaningful characteristics of how that civilization functions. That doesn't mean we're worth less. We still have our own duties and responsibilities, and we will find ways to fulfill our own lives. But if you're concerned about your future children and your bloodline going on to be able to have a better standard of living, then you need to push those gifted children as hard as you can now, so that when we're gone and buried, the great things that those people have gone and achieved will be of direct benefit to your offspring. Uh, there's some old adage or saying, it's something to the effect of, civilization grows great when old men plant trees in whose shadow they shall never sit. That's the mentality I have. It's not about trying to produce equal outcomes for all now. It's about producing a better future for the people that are not yet born.
Do if they're really involved with their kids. Well, they take them out of that public school and they put them in a private school. They take them out of the public school, they put them in homeschool where they can get accelerated academic achievement, accelerated learning, and set them up for just better success in the future. So part of that, we have to be honest, why do homeschool kids score so much better than kids in the schools? It's mostly selection bias, right? The smart kids with the super involved parents see that the public school is not going to give their kid what they want, that it's not a safe academic environment for them in a lot of cases. Again, that's the result of demographics. They feel that their kid's not safe. They feel that their kid's not being able to get through all the material in a math class because you are teaching to a lower standard.
I've seen this in practice. The poor middle school math teacher I worked with last year, he had to break the standards down into such minute chunks and slow walk all the standards he had to cover throughout the year because nobody would learn anything otherwise. The skill set was not sound by the time they had reached middle school math. And because the skill set wasn't completely sound, like you have to go slow. And to his credit, he was a consummate professional. He hit all the major clusters by the end of the year, but not every standard was covered. And some of the stuff that might not be a major standard in, for example, 8th grade could very well be something that does snowball into something important in 9th grade. So that need to scale back instruction definitely handicaps, at the very least, the gifted students moving forward, because half the time they're sitting there bored out of their mind because there's not much that they can do during core instruction time. And yeah, we had ways for them to be able to go and do things that enrich their learning. In fact, I just got a message from a former student of mine talking about how he's already winning collegiate level mathematics competitions. He's a freshman in high school now, but he was bored out of his mind last year because the instruction couldn't be catered to him. So when you homeschool a student, you can make sure the instruction is always maximally beneficial for that student. And if the parents invest in the process, yeah, that student's going to grow a lot better than in the public education system.
In order to get through any of the material, you have to teach to a lower standard. So you take them out, you put them in a different academic environment where they can actually achieve. And that just makes that public school have even lower standardized test scores. So I've had some people respond to this by saying, well, we shouldn't allow the smart kids to be taken out of public school because that's what's making public school worse. Again,
Wow. That has to be a leftist argument if I've ever seen it. They effectively want equal outcomes to be forced upon those smart kids. Because the truth is, we shouldn't care necessarily on what is best for the test scores of schools. All we should ever care about is what is best for the test scores of individuals. And for the overwhelming majority of individuals, if you've got parents that can manage it, homeschooling is the best model. If you've got a highly educated parent at home that can figure out proper instruction, that is going to be number one. So the idea that you should be handicapping these gifted children by making them stay in the public schools, that's actually a new one on me, and the only thing I could think of is they simply want to achieve, well, equity. They want equal outcomes for all.
You're skirting around the issue, which is that the demographics have changed. No, it doesn't work that way. Average scores may go up if you make all the smart kids go to public school, but that the smart kids are not making the dumb kids smarter. It doesn't work that way. A kid that's lower achieving is not going to magically achieve higher and achieve more and learn more because he's in the proximity of kids who are smart and are able to be high achievers.
Interestingly, if kids are around a kid that is far too smart for them, it can actually harm their sense of self-efficacy, or they develop a sense of learned helplessness where they just want to go to the smart kid for answers to everything. Before the modern AI generation, that's kind of what many kids of lower performance did anyway. They just, who's the smartest kid in class on that subject? And they beeline for him, and hey, can I get the answers from it?
just doesn't work that way. What you're seeing is just an average increase in scores because the far end of that bell curve, they're now included more in the scores. That makes them go up. It's not that the lower achieving kids are magically learning more. In fact, they may actually learn less depending on what you're doing, because if you accelerate the material, all of a sudden they can't hang at all and they have to be in a remedial class, and their achievement actually can end up being lower because they just can't get with whatever the higher mainstream is. You always teach to like the middle 50%. Not as a rule, but practically that's what ends up happening. So no, forcing the smart kids to go back into public school, which is bad for them, is not going to be good for the lower achieving kids. You have to meet those lower achieving kids where they are and figure out how to maximize whatever you're going to do with them. So that's my whole spiel on why public schools actually suck. It's because our demographics have changed over time. We've replaced one population with another. We have kids that are coming from outside the country. They don't know English. They're at a major academic disadvantage. And then you're going to have to go look at the average scores of where they're coming from. And if the average scores of where they're coming from are low, why would you expect their scores, as soon as they set foot on the magic dirt of the United States, to rise to the former academic standards of the United States? It's just not a realistic expectation. Not at all. So no one really wants to say why it is, but parents know why it is. And doesn't mean that it can't be improved. It doesn't mean it can't be made better, but you just have to be realistic about what you're doing. Parents tend to know. Most people are not going to speak honestly about it because it's not convenient. It's not something that you can be like, write a bigger check to us and we'll make the kids do better. It's something that can't be solved by the school system on its own. Anyway, leaving your thoughts down below. I'd love to know what your thoughts happen to be and what some of your decisions, if you have children, what some of those decisions are and have been. And I'm just interested in hearing what you guys have to think about it. So
I'm going to go ahead and end the video there. That was a good video. He is tackling a very difficult subject. My summation of it is this. He referenced demographics. I kept referencing culture. Uh, there is some synchronicity between the two concepts, but within the perspective of the United States and how groups are performing in the education system, we know at the collegiate level that there's been issues with whites and Asians getting admission to certain universities, despite the fact that their demonstrable performance is great, in preference of the groups that are more commonly associated with having the achievement gap, which is notably Hispanics and Black Americans. Well, we know from data that there are quite a few groups that actually outperform white Americans. So if all of our demographic shifts were coming just from Jewish people, East Asian people, I think Indian people are in that group now too, you would see none of these real complaints regarding student scores in schools. In fact, what you would be seeing is a sharp increase in student scores in schools. But as a percentage of the overall population that's come here, East Asians, Jews, and Indians are their population is increasing rapidly, but they absolutely pale in comparison to immigration from Africa, Middle East, Latin America. And so, given that the performance gap is coming from the same groups that have come here in the largest numbers, due to the way the numbers would work, you would see a gradual decline in performance as a nation. So he is correct. The demographics should be a factor when all of this is examined and looked at. It is relevant. As for whether there's a way to solve it, we know that within those populations that have achievement gaps, we absolutely know that there is plenty of individuals that actually have achieved more success than even some of these other ethnic groups I mentioned that have been as successful as whites or more so. Within that context, you'd have to look at what behaviors those parents of those students had been promoting in order to help achieve those outcomes. But then you would need those practices to become more common within those cultures. The more common they become, the higher those groups would perform. By way of analogy, since usually the lowest group you see with an achievement gap is Black Americans, if they adopted the same cultural behaviors, like an absolute swap into those behaviors of East Asians, then you would see them probably get performance more in line with what East Asians are achieving. But it's because the different cultures have very different priorities. It affects outcomes at school too. Of course, somebody watching this might somehow be like, oh, he thinks certain cultures are superior. Every culture is going to have things it does well and things it doesn't do so well. But within a specific topic, if you're controlling for a specific thing, like outcomes in the education system, yeah, there is going to inevitably be some group that performs best. Is what it is. But other than that, please give a like, comment, subscribe to David Stewart. I actually like this video. I appreciate when people are ready to drag out subjects that are verboten, that you're really not allowed to talk about because they're, well, they lead into a domain of discussion that starts to flirt with the racist word that scares a lot of people off from addressing any of these issues at all. Other than that, if you liked anything I had to say, like, comment, subscribe, etc. Have a good night.